Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Amsterdam-based landscape photographer Max Terwindt shares his evolution from a novice to an award-winning visual artist capturing the planet's most dramatic natural scenes. With a background in sustainability, Max brings a thoughtful, purpose-driven lens to his photography, aiming not just to showcase beauty, but to deepen our connection with the environment and raise awareness about its fragility. In this conversation, Max discusses his creative process, the role of composition, and how social media has shaped the trajectory of his career. He opens up about overcoming self-doubt, building a unique visual voice, and how guiding photo tours has allowed him to pass on skills while exploring some of the world's wildest places. From long exposures and drone work to the ethics of travel and the rise of AI in the arts, Max brings a balanced and inspiring perspective. Whether you're curious about the creative process or the mindset required to build a meaningful photography career, this episode offers both inspiration and insight. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Max. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
I'm doing fine, thank you. What about you?
Yeah, just fine. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show. I've admired your work for some time, and it's a real honour having you on the show. Why don't we start with what photography means to you and why it's such a big part of your life?
Yeah, thanks for your invitation. And indeed, you're right. It's a very big part of my life. I've always been very creative. And actually, back in the days, I didn't like photography at all.
Okay.
As a kid, when my mother wanted me on the photo, I was always running away. So my connection with cameras was like zero until I got 23, 24. Until then, I was always doing other stuff that basically was a way for me to be creative. For example, before I was into photography, I was into music. I was producing deep house music.
Okay.
Before that, I was drawing and painting, mainly as a kid. Once I started traveling a lot, I discovered basically how to capture the best moments and the feeling I had, and then just using a GoPro or my phone. And eventually I started upgrading. I realized the potential of the cameras and the digital area.
Sure.
Yeah, I upgraded to a Nikon, just like a cropped sensor one. And I realized the potential, and some people taught me during trips how to make long exposure photos. So I was like doing a lot with that, bought some filters, a cheap tripod. And from that moment on, like almost every year, I basically upgraded and I went to full frame. I made trips with the full purpose of taking photos. And I was also just taking solo trips and discovering myself and my creativity. And I got a lot of inspiration from social media because when I started, it was around 2014. It was also the year when I made my first Instagram account. And in the early years, I had no idea how to grow my account, but I was just posting what I liked. And it was a huge source of inspiration because I just started following the bigger names already back then.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at these photos. Okay, I want to do something similar, but still with my own twist. But obviously back in the days, it was already impossible to even copy the photo like that. So eventually years later, I started to create my own signature.
Okay.
So yeah, now we are more than 10 years later, and now I'm running my own tours, selling prints. And yeah, like you say, it became a very big part of my life, and it's a true passion. And I'm very fortunate to be able to turn my hobby into my profession.
Yeah.
To make a little living out of it.
You've mentioned a few things that I want to dive into a little bit later in the conversation, but I guess starting with some of those influences, what were the biggest influences that you got? Which were the big names that you were following, and what sort of photography were you looking at that said, okay, this is the direction I want to go?
Yeah, obviously back in the days, AI wasn't a thing. So every photo I saw was like a real photo, even though they were edited a lot. For example, names Max Rife, same given name.
Yep.
I think Netherlands as well. He edits a lot, but his edits are great. And these photos, these locations, it for me, it was a huge source of inspiration, but also names like Daniel Gordon, the bigger names,
Yeah.
which were already very active on social media back then. Those are among the names that were really influencing me.
Yeah. Nice.
And I've seen, like, for example, Matt's Peter Iverson was on his show as well. He was one of those as well.
Yeah, Mads's work is magnificent. Same with Max and Daniel. Yes, same with Max and Daniel's work. All fantastic photographers. I hope to actually get on to Daniel and the other Max as well.
Yeah.
At some point. I guess looking at those, what was it about their work that sort of said, okay, this is a creative challenge for me. This is where I want to go. And how have you put your own spin on that sort of style that you've developed?
Actually, their style, their photography includes layers and a great mood. So they have a foreground, a midground, a background, never taken on a dull moment in the middle of the day. So timing, light-wise, it's a very important matter. And obviously, already from the start, I realized, okay, I have to get out of bed early to be there before the masses and to have the great lights and the fog. That's a thing you can easily learn and time. But to create photos which have a very good balance with foreground, background, and to combine all these elements and to make a piece of art, that was a struggle. And that's something people that are doing photography all of their life are still struggling with. It's really, you need to have a certain eye for composition, and it's something you can learn. You really have to, you need this talent. And so that's something, it took me quite some years. And also in the beginning, I wasn't really sure what I liked the most because I was just taking pictures of everything that you can do while traveling. So even people, animals, cityscapes, landscapes. And way later, I added astrophotography and more topics, but I dropped a lot as well. I basically never take photos of people anymore.
Okay.
And the man-made things are vanishing from the topics that I capture, even though it works quite well, especially where I live. There's hardly any untouched nature. So if I like to take great photos of the Netherlands, it, for example, includes a windmill in the landscapes, which is man-made as well, but at least it's a great subject in the photo.
Yeah,
Great
focal point. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
You're connecting with places before you photograph them through research and planning, or are you more instinctual and you just go, okay, well, I know I can get a shot here or anywhere, and therefore I'll just head out and look for what I can find?
Obviously, a place ends up on my bucket list because I've seen great photos. But once I'm there, I'm looking around all the time to see new perspectives. And it's always great to have a beautiful photo taken on a spot where basically no photographer has ever been.
Yeah.
And even though it's hard to find these days, but slowly I'm getting to places where this is actually the case.
Okay. And is that one of the goals that you've set yourself, to find these remote places? Or
that's actually one of my dreams.
that-
Yeah, to be able to travel to places on Earth which are basically, the normal people can't reach them because they're simply out of touch. There are no connections there. So you need to, for example, go on a liveaboard and sail for weeks to end up in some fjords in Canada, for example, to see places no one else has ever seen, maybe from a plane. And still today, there's so many places like that that are just out of reach. But for me, they're still out of reach as well. But it's one of my dreams, one of my goals, to be the first to take great photos on unknown locations.
And is it important for you to have projects to work on and work through that sort of project list or bucket list of locations?
No, not really. Yeah, I want to make a living out of it, to the same places every year, but I also like to add new locations every year. So some places I've been there like 10, 11 times, like Iceland or Lapland, north of Finland, places Norway, the Dolomites. Those are relatively easy for me to reach with just a single flight. But every time I'm there, I still discover new places. And I still come home with completely new content. And that's so great about traveling and being creative, and not just use a bucket list of locations that I saved and, oh, I want this shot, want that shot. No, I want new shots every trip. And that's also part of creativity, not just to use your camera in a way which is more creative, but also to use the map and the world in a more creative way.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more because I'm interested in how you view a landscape and what are the things that you're actually looking for. Obviously, foreground, midground, background elements, but I guess a little bit deeper than that. What are the actual things that you're looking for in terms of putting together a composition?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, when I arrive at a spot, whether it's a completely unknown location or a spot that is already very hyped and famous, it's always a challenge for me and some sort of game to translate the landscape that I have and the light that I have at that moment into some sort of art. I walk around, I'm very versatile. Like, I see people arriving at spots with their tripod and their filters, and they just settle very easily and they take photos from eye level. And that's such a missed chance. And I keep
Yeah.
walking around trying to improve my composition. I go very low to the ground to have more depth, focus stacking, bracketing. I use all the techniques, then quickly move to another spot because I'm always sure that I can improve it, that I can find even more interesting composition. So that's the game that I like, to walk around quickly, and therefore I completely forget about my surroundings. So sometimes when I'm traveling with my clients, they lose sight of me, but still they can follow me if they want to. But usually they are already very satisfied arriving at this beautiful spot and they like to do their own thing. And if they need me, I'll stay around and teach them everything. But if I travel by myself, I'm very quickly moving from one spot to another and being very creative. And that's what I like the most.
Okay, interesting. And I guess what role does experimentation play in your work? Do you experiment with different techniques? Do you experiment with different views and angles and even gear? How do you experiment with your work to extend yourself and go beyond just, okay, this is where I'm going to set the tripod and it's going to be down low and I'll get that depth, etc. I know what I'm going to get. How do you go beyond that?
Yeah, after all these years, you start learning what works and what doesn't work. So in the beginning, I took photos of interesting angles, but they just didn't work. So these days, I just don't bother about being too out of the box because I like to think out of the box, but I know exactly which things just don't work, which just don't translate to a nice photo that is appealing to the eye and that is satisfying. Yeah, that really streamlines my workflow, and still I'm able to really, yeah, get my own signature into my photography and not to have a full SD card photos that I'm never going to use. I'm very selective which photos I take, but still have a lot of different angles and compositions.
How many photos would you take on a normal day shoot?
Actually, it really depends, because if you really count all the raw files, it's relatively a lot. But since a lot of raw files are part of a, for example, panorama or
Yeah,
a
panorama
photo,
of photos.
yeah. So if I just look at the end result, then it's not that much. Then on one day, it's maybe only 35 photos, and maybe only 5 I would use.
Okay.
But 35, in reality, that's 200 files on my car. And that's still not that much compared to the other people. But 200 is a lot more than the 35. But yeah, since one photo sometimes contains 12 or even more, then it adds up very quickly.
I want to talk a little bit about how you've come to that conclusion around being very selective about what works and what doesn't. What are the sort of things that don't work, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. What doesn't work? Yeah. What I usually just never really do anymore and did in the beginning is just a photo with, for example, the subject and its reflection and no foregrounds. Like, many people take these photos,
Sure.
but for me, it's just too boring, it misses something. It misses another layer. You want to see where where the viewer is actually looking at and where it's standing. Just a view of a subject and a reflection doesn't tell anything about where you're standing. If you're on the boat, on the bridge, or just on the edge of the lake. And that's something that really creates another like feeling to the photo. If you see some stones in the foreground, a piece of wood, it really makes the photo tangible. And if you don't include this part in the photo, it's just meaningless to me. Even though the light is great, the reflection is perfect, I just don't take these photos anymore, even though almost everybody still does it. And yeah, it's something I learned over the years.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess for many people, just getting that mirror image as you say, in a reflection where you've got your horizon line dead in the middle and you're getting the symmetry, I guess for many people that can be quite pleasing to the eye. It's just interesting that you're looking to add another element into that composition.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, people that take minimalistic shots, they do that a lot. And it's still appealing to the eye, but for me, it's just too boring.
Okay.
And I like wide shots. And still have this topic with the reflection in it, but a whole framing around it. And especially as a foreground. And the foreground really complements to the subject, especially if you have diverting lines as leading lines towards this topic, then it even makes the topic with reflection stronger because your eyes are leading to it and the foreground, if it's nice and sharp as well, that you really see how the environment looks like, what kind of plants are growing there, what kind of stones.
Sure.
All the elements are combined. And I didn't tell this yet, but I have a background in sustainability and I studied environment and resource management. So I had a lot of topics at the uni that were diving really deep into geology and topics like that. So that means that I also know what I'm capturing. Like I know things related to erosion, tectonics, volcanoes.
Yeah.
So it's not just, oh, I see a volcano, nice, I can write it off the list. For me, it's also like, oh, I've been studying this and reading about it, and now I'm really there. So that really adds up to my experience. I will never forget when I saw the first lava flowing in front of my feet in Iceland. I was there all alone, and I could like almost touch the lava if it wasn't too hot.
Bad idea.
Because of the special moments I will never forget. And it was always better than the second or third or fourth time you see that.
Yeah, I guess it's like many things. The first time you shoot the Milky Way, for example, there's a lot of excitement about that, but then it becomes, and your work is excellent, and I'm certainly not knocking other astrophotography in any way, shape or form, but you know where the Milky Way is going to be because you can predict that. There's apps to even show you where to line it up. So it does become more process orientated, I think, around, okay, I've got to get a foreground, I've got to get the Milky Way in the angle that I want it, so I need to be here for this time. And whether I'm using stacks or whether I'm using a tracker for a single exposure over minutes, whatever, I'm now engaged more in the process of making the image than I am about the wonder and the excitement. Is that how you're feeling about some of your photography at the moment, or is it?
I always try to keep the technology part of it a bit as more like a tool rather than the prime part of my workflow, because I am way more into just being in nature and being creative rather than working with star trackers and tripods and all this technological stuff, even though I started learning how it works because you just basically have to in order to capture great shots. But for example, the photo that you can see right behind me wasn't planned at all. I was just shooting the famous flowers on the top of La Palma during sunset. And I knew I was on the right spot for the Milky Way as well. So I just stayed until it was dark, and I had no clue that what was coming after, because just after the mountain range, there were clouds, and since the microclimates on the Canary Islands, these clouds can move around and they get higher, lower. And at this point, it was pitch black, and I was just walking around, looking for a nice foreground element that I could combine with the Milky Way that was slowly moving higher on the horizon, was basically setting above the island. And then all of a sudden, when I was taking some sample shots, I noticed that the clouds behind the mountains were elevating and flowing over the mountains. And that created these insane cloud falls, and it
Yeah.
only lasted for maybe 10 minutes. I was just shooting, and after 10 minutes, the clouds were that high that I was myself in the cloud as well. I never had these conditions again, but I was very fortunate to be able to capture a foreground element, the midground, were basically the cloud falls, and then the background, the Milky Way. So it's a perfect example of a photo that has 3 layers, and which is very unique. As I said, I've been to La Palma many times. I'm going there in a week as well, and I never had these conditions like this. The clouds were exactly on the level of the peaks and then just flowing through. It's either too high, too low, or yeah, that was very nice. And I've never seen anyone else posting something similar like this as well, which makes it still very unique, even though this photo is more than 4 years old.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm interested. You mentioned having a background in sustainability. Do you think photography has a place in talking about and communicating sustainability and environmental issues to the wider public? And if so, how effective do you think that's been?
Actually, it has a negative and a positive side. And the positive is the one you mentioned. You can use your photography indeed to convince people that we live on a very beautiful planet and that nature is something we should really treat well, and we definitely have effect on it. Our choices decide the health of our ecosystems these days. With photography, especially if you say something in your caption underneath your posts about the vulnerability of the earth and the effects of our choices, then it can work as a powerful tool. But it also has a very negative effect, because when certain spots on social media get hyped, I
Yeah.
really see these places degrade, and especially some spots that are very vulnerable. You have this Wanaka tree in New Zealand
Yep.
that is already partly broken, and many other spots as well. There's also a little famous tree on the island of Socotra, Yemen, that got famous because of certain photographers. And these days, people are starting to write names in the tree, and every bit of like little plants that were surrounding this tree are all like gone, because
Yeah.
thousands of people are walking around it. Even though the island is still relatively untouched, you can clearly see signs that over tourism, and especially photographers that go to certain spots because they want to take the same shot, that's going in a wrong direction, basically. So that's the negative side of sharing photos online.
Yeah, it's something which has been spoken about a few times on the podcast, and it's one that I don't think there's any really easy answers to, because everyone effectively has the right to go wherever they want to take a photo, and the photo that they want to take. But that over tourism also has impacts on the landscape itself. And in a lot of cases, it can actually start to degrade and even destroy that very landscape that's drawing people into it. I'm interested in your experiences with some of that, with, in particular, say, Iceland, and the massive increase in tourism that has happened there in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. If you go back 10 years ago, photos of they're not exactly rare, but they were much rarer than they are now.
Yep.
And you go there now and you go to some of the famous waterfalls, and honestly can't get there unless you're prepared to go there in the middle of winter, in the middle of the night. You're always going to be standing there with hundreds, if not a couple of thousand people around you.
Yeah. Yeah, Iceland is a good example, because indeed, like 15 years ago, it was not that popular yet. For people, it was just like, oh, there's this island a bit quite far off the coast, and there were not that much flights as today.
Yeah.
And now 15 years later, especially since the popularity of social media, this island got totally hyped, but for a good reason, because it's a very special place and it has so much to offer in terms of photography. Yeah, I can definitely compare the early years of Iceland getting hyped compared to these days. And yeah, obviously they have a very well functioning government that is very strict to lead the country, to not really degrade the landscapes and to balance it out. Like obviously tourism creates huge revenues, but for them, nature is also very important. It's a very sustainable country as they get all their energy from geothermal sources.
Yep.
But back in the days, you can just park right in front of the waterfall, just walk, take pictures, and there were maybe like 6 other people. These days, most waterfalls involve paid parking.
Yep.
Big buses full of tourists from all over the world, from Asia, and just large crowds. And you have to really stick to the path, and there are ropes on both sides, so you can't get off the path, which is really difficult for photographers to still take pictures with a nice foreground. So it's getting more tricky to take great photos, even though, like you say, there's still moments in the early morning or winter times when you can still be like one of the only people around.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, in general, there was also this music video of Justin Bieber that really made the island more popular in a certain canyon. They even shut down parts of it because Justin Bieber was walking outside of the tracks, and all these people wanted to take the same photos.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite a dangerous spot. You can really fall like 50 meters down into the canyon.
Yeah.
So they have to be very strict, and they don't have the resources to put guards, rangers over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they really have to trust on people to behave, basically. And if you just look at photographers, they're usually people that respect nature. And yes, they do.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah, mostly yes, more than just the average tourist that just wants a selfie. The photographers are usually not the ones that throw their trash into nature, because they're the ones that can be bothered the most, because they don't want pictures themselves either with trash in it.
They don't want to have to find it out in post-production.
Exactly, yeah. And just in general, they respect nature more than the city people that just come to nature to, for example, go to the spot where Justin Bieber took this video clip.
Yeah, sure.
But still, there are also photographers that have less respect. And like myself, I sometimes also fly a drone somewhere where it's officially not allowed.
Yeah.
But with the drone, yeah, it's an annoying sound and you can disturb wildlife. But on the other hand, you don't leave any footprints. You don't crush any plants or whatsoever. It works with electricity. So in that sense, it's also sustainable. But yes, on the other hand, I've been to places also in Iceland where I've seen several crashed drones into my plane, because there are also people flying their drones and have no experience and fly too close to the edges of the canyon. It's a different canyon, by the way, than the one I mentioned before. But I was surprised to see that, and yeah, they didn't even bother trying to get it back, possibly also because it was too dangerous, but it still seemed possible. But they just leave the drones out there, and there's a battery inside which has toxic substances. So yes, that was an eye opener as well. Like the drones that are getting crashed, and over the years it builds up.
Yeah. Can you see a situation where they might bring a permit system into play, a bit like some of the national parks in the US have done?
Well, start doing it in more and more countries. So also in Iceland, you need a permit these days. You need to register your drone, your name.
Yeah, I'm not just talking about drones, but in terms of accessing some of the locations.
Yeah, that's a whole different story, because yeah, in the end, everybody should have the right to enjoy nature, whether you are a photographer or not.
This is it. Yeah.
And yeah, it's a question of whether you want to give certain people the privilege. And I think that the bigger photographers already have certain privileges because they're famous and they can open doors that other people can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they have a network. They can arrange helicopters to fly over areas where some other people can't even fly their drone, even though a helicopter causes a lot more disturbance than just a drone.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a challenging space that I don't think there's any easy answers to. I know over here, all of the national parks, as far as I'm aware, drone flights are completely banned unless you apply for a permit. And so you have to put it all in writing, what you're doing there, why you need to fly a drone, etc., and then pay a fee. You don't get your fee back if they say no. Sorry, you can't fly.
Yeah.
It is a process that you've got to go through, and I'm certainly aware that some people have flown drones in places where they shouldn't, where they're officially banned, but it's definitely something that I think is a very challenging space at the moment.
Exactly, yeah, because on one hand, you don't want to completely forbid it, but because that's too easy for a government, and still it allows people to take photos that also can promote the area, which is even more profitable for a country, more tourism.
Sure.
But on the other hand, it does come with a lot of negatives. And I've been to places, for example, when I went to the volcanic eruption in Iceland 2 years ago, the area was closed due to toxic gases. And once it reopened, everybody that was on the island went to the eruption site at the same time. And I remember at one point I was looking around me in skies and I could count at least 25 drones. And I tried to fly myself as well. But since there were so many drones in the sky, the connection was struggling a lot.
Yeah, just the network bandwidth the radio bandwidth to be able to get a connection to your drone would be a challenge in itself.
Yeah. Like eventually I had to walk far away from the other people
Yeah.
to be able to fly my drone to the eruption site. And I was just simply not able to reach it because the connection completely dropped.
Yeah.
It had a blackout every time, just too many people flying around. And also what people with drones often tend to do is they lift it off close to a lot of other tourists, and then they just stick around that area. They fly over viewpoints where
Yep.
people are just enjoying nature in peace.
Yeah.
And then you hear this annoying buzzing sound, like there is some sort of big mosquito flying around. And that really bothers me as well, because
Yeah,
when I fly, I always try to fly far away from people because I don't want to be a nuisance for them.
I don't want to
And
be that guy.
Yeah. And I know that because people stay around other people, that's going to create even more bans.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a drone can also fall out of the sky and land on a group of people. Like, for example, once I was flying at the shore, I crashed into a seagull. So the drone just dropped and fell in the water.
Yeah.
But lost it. And I was like so annoyed, first of all, because I basically participated in, I destroyed my drone, but also the environment, the battery, everything is in the water, and that has a very negative effect to the ecosystem, the environment. So
The plastics, let alone the lithium, let alone all the other.
yeah, I felt very bad about it too.
Electronics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing somebody in Iceland, I'm pretty sure it was in Iceland, where they'd flown their drone over a lava flow. And even though they didn't get that close to it, the drone itself, the plastic started to melt. They got it back to where they could retrieve it, but it was in pretty poor shape by the time they got it back.
The heat is very intense. But there are even people, especially the FPV drone pilots, those are the race drones, the very quick ones. They deliberately crashed it into the lava because just for great content. And they still had the video because it was like broadcasted and saved on their remote control.
That's insane.
It's just clickbait, and it looks cool in the video, but you know that it just ends in nature basically. And it's less bad than the drone ending in the water in between the fish and everything. Like over there, it at least ends up inside some sort of stone when the lava petrifies.
Yeah, I can imagine some civilization in 10,000 years coming across it and going, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah. Yeah, probably like a fossil.
Have you got a spot that keeps you calling you back? Obviously, Iceland and the Canaries are places you've mentioned before, but is there a favourite location that you've just got to keep going back to?
Yeah, it's maybe a cliche need to mention the places like Patagonia, Iceland, Dolomites, but I also really Madagascar
Okay.
and I really loved Socotra as well, the Yemeni Islands.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also like to add new locations, but the ones that really make me want to go back all the time, that's also related to how easy I can reach them.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I went to Iceland 11 times, but it's also work related when I run tours. But it's also strange to say that some spots really appealed to me, but I never really felt the urge to go back simply because I was satisfied with the content that I captured.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just never really made any plans to go back because there's still a lot of places that I haven't seen yet, and they're still on the list. But yeah, there's just a handful of places that keep dragging me back. But those are mostly the cliche places that are relatively easy to reach.
Yeah.
But also like Greenland,
Yeah.
keep back there, even though the place I go in Greenland is always the same spot because traveling around Greenland is super hard and expensive.
Yeah.
So I stick around Disco Bay, where you have the biggest icebergs on Earth. And the reason why I keep coming back is that every time the icebergs are totally different. So every year you have different content. Like the subject is the same, the shapes are just different, and the light is different.
Interesting.
That makes it very interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned the image on your wall there as being one of your memorable shoots. Have there been any horror stories or any experiences where things haven't gone quite right?
Yeah, I was once taking photos in France at Mont Saint Michel, and over there you have to be very cautious with high tides. So I was very aware of that. So that wasn't the issue. But since there's a huge difference in high and low tide, like in low tide you can walk to the island basically, but in high tide you have to swim, and there are very strong currents. But I was just taking photos with great foregrounds because every time when it's low tide, you get all these textures in the muddy sands. And at one spot, I was taking photos with my tripod and it looked pretty firm the way I put my tripod and camera, but apparently it was slowly like falling to the left, like one of the tripod legs was submerging into the sand. And I saw it too late. So the camera fell into like this little 20 centimeters layer of salt water. So
No.
it submerged in the water very quickly because I was just too late to grab it. So once I had it, it was already totally wet and the water went inside because unfortunately cameras aren't waterproof these days and salt water is the worst. It was the water in the lens around the sensor. So I tried everything I could do to save it, but it was already too late. The camera was broken.
I've killed my Canon R6, not R6, 6D, sorry, Mark II 3 times that way. Not
Oh, wow.
in exactly the same circumstances. Usually a wave where I've gone and stood where I shouldn't have done, and the wave has come up and saturated the whole thing, and the salt's got in, and yeah, the bag of rice doesn't work, and nothing you do works. So
Actually, it makes it worse. The rice goes inside the camera. You can't get it out. Yeah, it's especially with seascapes. The sea or ocean is very unpredictable. Sometimes you have these sneaker waves. Yeah, it's the main ingredient for broken cameras.
yeah, absolutely.
Or even more, people falling and slipping.
Yeah, touch wood, nothing like that's happened with me. Certainly killed the camera a few times and had the units changed out. But yeah, definitely for me, doing a lot of seascapes, safety is absolutely critical. Wearing the right footwear and making sure people know where you are is absolutely vital, particularly when I'm going out at silly o'clock in the morning before the sun's up. And funnily enough, the only other people I usually see are rock fishermen, guys actually out on rock shelves with me, but they're throwing a line in to try and catch fish, and they're wearing most of the same sort of gear that I do.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty professional, yeah. Yeah, it's something maybe a lot of people are not completely aware of, but it's not just the risk for the camera, but even for your life. If
Absolutely.
you're out there alone and something happens, it's it's impossible to find you.
Absolutely. Got to be really careful with your footing, particularly seastaping, so that you stand on the wrong bit of a rock shelf and either the rock can tip one way or the other and you're in the water, or you hit a slippery bit of moss or something like that. And
Yeah,
yeah. And, as I say, I've been really lucky, I think, in that I've avoided it, but yeah, it can be pretty sketchy sometimes.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, also high in the mountains, you also hit
Oh,
or
it's totally. How do you think landscape photography has changed your relationship with the world?
how it changed my relationship with the world. Yeah, it's started making me look to the world in a different way, of course. When I think about countries, I immediately think about what to capture there and what beauty it has to offer. And usually, for example, when people ask me, what's the most beautiful country you've seen? There's no single answer to that. Every country has its own beauty, and
Yeah.
obviously bigger ones have way more to offer. My country is super small. You can't compare it to the United States or to Russia or whatever.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, like whether it's a desert or a jungle, I can find beauty in every landscape as long as it's not too much touched by humans. Because we see that humans have a very negative impact on our planet, on nature, unfortunately. And especially in more developed countries, that they do a lot of effort and attempts to at least maintain the health of the planet, of the nature. But in certain countries, especially countries where they have bigger issues than nature, third world countries where they just don't really care about protecting the environment. In in certain countries in Southeast Asia or South Asia, they just throw all the garbage in nature, and not just random visitors.
Yeah.
Even the guards, for example, or the rangers, you see them doing similar things.
Interesting.
That's something that really bothers me. And we are basically way too many people on this planet, and we are smart enough to stay alive ourselves in general and to provide ourselves with enough food. But it always has a negative impact on nature. Like every highway we build, every city that we expand, it's always a plus for us, but a negative thing
Right.
yeah. And that really makes me think, okay, we are very arrogant as human
Oh,
beings.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We think we have all the answers, but I don't think we even know some of the questions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also, since social media is taking over people's lives, and that makes people very vulnerable for fake news.
Oh,
So
totally.
people these days that don't believe in climate change anymore
Yeah.
because of the abundance of fake news that is being spread around.
Mm.
And yeah, it's not just that I've studied it, that I know better. I'm seeing it with my own eyes. Well,
No, exactly.
you can see what we are causing to our environments. So it's not just, oh, I've read this and you have read that and you're right, I'm wrong, or vice versa. No, it's just like common sense and just looking around you,
Yeah.
see what we're doing. I can even see the differences between how a glacier looked like 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And even though I'm not that old yet, you still see the planet changing. And it's very arrogant to think, oh, well, it's not happening. It's a hoax. It's just the governments that try to increase taxes on us or something like that. No, it's the oil industry, for example, that uses their power to basically
Influence the government.
yeah, so they can keep selling their oil because they have plenty of oil. They already have so much power because of that. They are lobbying just to make us more fossil fuel addicted, even though we already have so much technology to do better.
Yeah.
There
are alternatives there.
Absolutely, yeah, and they are just holding it back because they want to get rid of their oil.
Well, to be honest, I think it is down to political will that is going to eventually make the difference. The question is, will it come too late? And it may not even start to turn around in my lifetime. I don't have that many years left, but
Yeah,
that I do have, I'd certainly like to see governments change their minds around how they behave. And to be honest, the only way that's going to happen is if people actually stand up to the oil companies and the lobby groups that are, and in our country, mostly coal companies as well, and start to say, sorry, that's not viable for the future, and it really needs to change.
Yeah. And actually that's happening, of course, but the
Totally.
reputation of people that stand up for nature is not very well. They are seen as the crazy ones, and the
Yeah.
people that just want to live their lives and think, okay, I only have one life on this planet. Let me just enjoy eating meat. Let me just enjoy driving a car, taking a plane, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Those are seen as the normal ones, even though this
Absolutely.
behavior is destructive. We're basically committing suicide on this planet, and it's painful to watch. And as the abundance of people thinks like that, that means that with the current political system in a democracy, they vote for the leaders that have the same thoughts.
Absolutely.
So a leader that says we should just all focus on growing our economy and lowering the cost of fuel or whatever X, those are getting all the votes. But the people that are standing up for nature and for animals and for the real future of our planet in the long term,
Yeah,
they're getting less votes.
that's it. Yeah. I think that's probably going to, as I say, stay that way for some time to come, unfortunately, until...
Unfortunately, yes, yeah, you can see that populism is getting more popular these days.
Yeah, I think until climate disasters actually force people to go, oh, they were right. We do need to change. And unfortunately, by then, it is going to be very close to being too late.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And yeah, there are many people these days that are saying, okay, climate change is real, but not because of humans, because we are coming from an ice age and therefore it was
Yeah.
cold and now it's getting warmer. But these people don't really realize that the area between ice ages is 200,000 years at least.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing right now
Acceleration.
happening in 150 years. And that's exactly since we invented plastic, oil, and everything that ruins our planet. So if you put it in perspective, then you know better. But some people just don't want to know because they're afraid they have to drive small electric cars, have to stop eating meat, have to live in smaller houses, have to pay more taxes. So they see it as some sort of a dangerous thing that can affect their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And they rather choose for a nice, wealthy, and comfy lifestyle than a more sober life where we can at least safeguard the future and health of the planet.
Absolutely. Let's talk about how you decided to become a full-time photographer. What was that decision process like?
It's related to the fact that once I started my post-study life and I was in the field of being, as I graduated as a environmental and resource management student, I just didn't see myself really dive into this corporate world and working on projects in between four walls and not seeing how beautiful this planet is, not being creative. So consultancy wasn't a thing that was really something that gave me a bright future view of. That wasn't the path I wanted to take. And at that time, I was more and more focusing on photography, and my accounts on social media started to grow. So I basically made the decision, despite a lot of like negative advice from people around me. I still continued trying to make it work, trying to make a profession out of my hobby. And obviously, so many people try to do this, and so many do not succeed because it's not the shortest path to wealth, to at least pay their
It's
bills.
definitely not a usual path to wealth.
Exactly, yeah. And
Very rare that you get a wealthy landscape photographer in particular.
luckily, that's not my goal. I don't really see happiness in being extremely rich. I can pay for my bills if I have the funds to travel to places, and obviously traveling is expensive, but I don't seek luxury. I like to keep a low profile and I don't care sleeping in a very cheap hotel. Like
Yeah.
As long as it's not a hostel and where I can keep my gear safe, then I'm
Yep.
fine. Then I can just do my thing. And if I have the freedom to just roam around, if I have a rental car, accommodation, and some food, for example, in a lot of places, I just go to a supermarket, I buy a lot of food, and I just cook it myself with my camping gear. I managed to be able to travel very low budget. And not all the time, some places just don't allow for low budget traveling.
Yeah.
But still, because of that, it gives you more freedom. I don't need to look for hotels with a certain amount of stars or a certain amount of amenities. As long as there's a bed and a little bit of safety and
I like to have
food.
at least one star.
Yeah. Of course, once you're in a nice hotel, you can enjoy it even more because you're used to the crappy ones.
Yeah.
That changed your perspective as well. But in general, to have a life with freedom and to be able to do the things you love, that was for me such a big motivation
Mm.
to achieve this. And even though I will never get rich just because of photography, and yeah, if that's not your goal, then it's totally fine as long as you can pay your bills.
Yeah. Have you ever struggled to find inspiration with your photography?
No, obviously, it's related to your mental state. I was in a long relationship, and when my relationship ended, I was quite down for at least 1, 2 months.
Yep.
And during these 2 months, I didn't have the motivation to even grab my camera and go out there. But after I got better mentally, I started to find joy in back in photography because it never vanished. I just had different things on my mind.
Sure.
But overall, I never really struggled to find inspiration because I just like being creative. And it's just something that is inherently part of me and my character. So even, for example, during the pandemic, I was still able to do the things I love. There are still places with less restrictions. And I was just like looking at my own country more and it me rediscover my own country, even though it's small and every piece of land is basically human touched. But still, I liked it and it really opened my eyes. So you don't need to travel all around the globe to do what you love, even though I was getting more and more used to these insanely beautiful remote landscapes. It's like I said, when you arrive at a spot, it's a challenge. It's like a game to find an interesting angle.
Yeah.
Back then, yeah, the area was just a bit smaller. So the challenge was bigger.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
What do you see as photography's place in society?
The place in society, yeah. I think it's just a very popular hobby for people that love the topic that they capture and like to be creative. And it's a form of art. So it's very versatile, I would say. For example, when I'm talking to strangers and I'm telling them I'm a photographer and they come up with stories of different photographers, but they shoot something totally different,
Yeah.
like portraits or whatever,
Mm.
then for me, there's no connection. Okay, we both use a camera, but there's no overlap between what I shoot and what this other person shoots.
Yeah.
So it's just a camera.
Two style, they're completely divorced from one another.
Exactly, yeah. So being a photographer doesn't mean that you immediately connect with any other photographer. So that makes it a very broad spectrum where there's overlap in a technical way because you use the same appliances.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, that's just it. And I have no interest in any photographer that shoots something completely unrelated to what I shoot
Interesting. Yeah.
because I'm not interested in cameras, basically. For me, a camera is just a tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the newest one. I like to travel light, so I don't want too many lenses. Just want all the things that can do what I want to do. And obviously, newer gear, especially a newer drone, is able to capture better shots than the older ones. So, in that sense, I upgrade more quickly than with my camera.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. What do you see as the future of photography, and what do you see as the biggest challenges facing photographers right now?
I guess it's also a cliche to mention AI, but I just have to mention it. And AI is helping us, but it's also a threat
Yeah.
in the sense that it's taking away attention from the real stuff. Because the a random viewer of a photo can distinguish AI and real photos. Like a real photographer even struggles sometimes to see if it's
Yeah.
real or fake. Usually my eyes are trained very well. I can quickly see if it's fake or not because I recognize locations and I recognize these certain patterns, and usually AI photos are just too perfect.
Yeah.
But still these days they're getting better, and sometimes I'm not completely sure if it's real or not. Also because you can use AI denoise tools that create certain patterns in a photo if you zoom in that look like AI in general, like the full photo was AI, which was the case. Yeah, it's getting more tough, and it helps me in the sense that I can also use higher ISO
Yeah.
because the AI denoise is getting better,
Yeah.
which is great. But it's actually better for people that do wildlife photography or sports because you need a very quick shutter speed. In my field, it's a bit less important, but at night you still need a high
You
ISO.
still need to go up there for astro. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. In Astro, it works very well. But on the other hand, on social media or wherever, AI photos take away attention because they just look more perfect and more appealing to the eye, to the untrained eye, than a real photo.
Yep.
But the photo has no soul. It's not even a photo. It's even copyright infringement.
Yeah.
All the database, the photos that AI uses as inspiration, they are unrightfully used. Nobody gave permission. I would never give permission to AI to use my photos as inspiration, but it just happens and it's hard to control. It's some sort of gray area.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of issues in the way that they're trained that sort of drive challenges in terms of copyright and so forth. And I think then on top of that, there are also environmental issues in terms of the amount of water used for cooling in data centers, the amount of electricity that has to be generated, etc., where that electricity is coming from. And then on top of that, all of the issues around silicon usage, lithium usage, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole raft of other environmental issues which come along with using AI that just haven't really been that much of an issue in previous years.
Yeah. That's also something that really adds up to the issue. And in general, any form of AI comes with a huge amount of energy, and also cryptocurrencies. All these modern techniques, they require a lot of energy. But like I said, we already on this earth have the knowledge and the techniques to do it in a sustainable way. So AI is still the future, and it really helps us to in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Which is to make it more sustainable.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Get rid of all these polluting factors.
What's the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
The worst advice is maybe easier because
Okay.
when people just tell you to be a consultant and do what you've studied for instead of following your dreams, that's something which, especially today, I can say that's a very stupid advice because I believe in myself and I'm not a happy person if you lock me up between four walls.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd rather be a bit more poor and happy than to have a monthly income which is way higher than the rest and be basically some sort of prisoner.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm definitely with you there.
But the best advice, yeah, that maybe is also easy. The people that told me to believe in yourself and to keep continuing what you're doing, but that's also a bit of a cliche.
Yeah.
Still, and obviously there are people on both spectra.
Yeah, definitely. I've only got another couple of questions for you. Are there any photographers out there you think I should be talking to?
There are always many. I've quickly been checking your list of the photographers that you've been speaking to. I'm not sure if you've ever spoken to more Dutch photographers.
Not many, only one or two, I think. And I know I've got another couple lined up.
Okay. Yeah, one of the most famous ones is Albatross. Maybe he's up for it.
He's on my list. I haven't got
Yeah.
him, haven't lined him up yet, but he's definitely on my list, and I definitely want to talk to Albert.
Yeah, he has an interesting story, and he's a way bigger example of somebody that really turned his hobby into a profession. Yeah, yeah, and then there are many more international photographers. Maybe Philip Rebenda, the
Okay. Yep.
in Slovakia, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really admire his work as well. Let me think of other names as well. Yeah, I really have to look it up. Because
Okay. No problem. But thank you for Albert anyway.
yeah, of course.
My last question's one I've been asking since the beginning of the podcast, and I recently published the results of where we got to for 200 episodes. So if you haven't listened to episode 200, go back and get to the end of that, and you'll find out where most photographers lie. But do you like pineapple on pizza?
Actually, as a kid, that was always the pizza I liked the most.
Yeah.
But these days, I don't eat mammals. I don't eat beef or pork. So
Fair enough.
I don't really eat pizza with pineapple anymore. But I probably would still like it. But the pizza Hawaii always contains ham, and I don't eat ham.
Okay. Good.
But
Bacon.
yeah, but still, I don't think it's bad. And I know Italians would hate me for it, but I don't really care to do things out of the box.
Fair
So I
enough.
would put fruit on a pizza, but it's also a bit hypocrite to say that fruit shouldn't belong on a pizza because in the end, tomato is also a fruit.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Max. It's been really wonderful talking to you and learning a lot about you. Where can people find your work?
Well, on social media, I'm mostly active on Instagram, not really on Facebook anymore. Maybe I should, but I think it already consumes a lot of energy to maintain one social media profile. So for me, it's Instagram, and I have my website, of course, where they can see all the tours that I'm planning to do, which is really interesting. More and more locations are added to the list every year: Greenland, Patagonia, Lapland, Madagascar, Socotra, Yemen.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm really hoping for this to really work out, because in a lot of cases I just have to abort it, have to cancel it because there's not enough people. But some tours are always successful.
Yeah.
Every year I'm going to Lapland, Iceland works, and since this year Patagonia, that works as well. Those are the spots people really love.
Yeah.
But they're very hesitant when it comes up to places like Madagascar or Socotra,
Yeah.
because it's a poor place. It's not that famous yet, but still,
Yeah, it's still off the beaten track a little bit.
I work with local guides when I do tours in the more poor countries, and I know them personally, and it's not a single moment where I feel unsafe, and people are very welcoming, and these countries have such a lot to offer. And when it's about Socotra, that's an island which is connected with a flight to the United Arab Emirates. So when you visit it, you completely surpass the mainland where there's a war. And
Yeah.
island is basically more under control of the Emirates rather than Yemen.
Yeah.
So also over there, I felt completely safe. There are no traces of war. There may be a few tanks, but they're there since the 70s. So for 50 years, it's safe. And that shouldn't be a reason for people not to visit this place.
No, definitely. And if anyone listening wants to join Max on one of his trips, head to his website. Thanks again, Max. It's been really
Thanks a lot as well for inviting me to the podcast.
pleasure.
Yeah.
For the listeners, have you tried to challenge yourself in your landscape photography? Leave a comment below and tell us about your experience. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work and this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com, along with prints and photography gear. I'm also on Vero, Photo, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.